We are fortunate today. We have my friend Ken Blanchard, who really needs no introduction, but I'm going to give you a brief one anyway. I honestly didn't want to like the One Minute Manager, which is his the big book that has sold probably tens, if not hundreds of millions of copies. But I didn't want to like it because I didn't like the idea of story based books. And despite myself, I really fell in love with it, and it became a book that I gave to a ton of people when they first started learning management because I think it does what Ken does so well, which is so clearly and succinctly cut things down to their very essence and then reflect on them and share them in a way that's practical and easily understood by the people who are taking it on and helps to close that knowing doing gap, the gap between, what we know and what we actually end up doing. And Ken might just be the best person at that I know, and I try to learn from him. So we're lucky enough to have him on the show for the second time. We're talking about his newest book, Servant Leadership in Action. He wrote it with Renee Broadwell, How You Can Achieve Great Relationships and Results. I loved it, and I'm excited to have Ken on the show with us today. Ken, welcome to the Bregman Leadership Podcast.
Well, good. Great to be with you.
Ken, let's start with what is servant leadership?
Well, when I mention servant leadership to people in industry, they often think it's about the inmates running the prison or trying to please everybody or some religious movement. But they don't understand there's two parts of servant leadership. There's the leadership part, which is about vision and direction, values and goals. It's leadership's about going somewheres, and the responsibility for that is with the hierarchy. I mean, it doesn't mean you don't involve people, but if people don't know where you're going and what you're supposed to accomplish and all, shame on you. And one of the problems, in Washington, we don't want to get into that. We don't have a vision for our country anymore. We don't know what business we're in. We don't know what we're trying to accomplish. All the values are relative. Like, for example, freedom of speech. I would have thought that would be a universal value. But if you criticize some interest group, they don't say, "Can I disagree with you?" They surround your business and try to put you out of business. So this is so important. In the Bible, it says people without vision do what? They perish. And so that's the leadership part of servant leadership. And then once that's done, the servant part takes over, and now you philosophically turn the pyramid upside down, and now you work for your people to help them live according to the vision and accomplish the agreed upon goals. And so it's really a 1-2 punch, but it's really it's an inside out job, though. It's a character issue because the question is, are you here to serve or be served? And you can have all the theories in your head, but if in your heart you think life is all about you, uh, you're going to have problems.
Now,
So
I want to explore this in your own life because you don't have to work anymore, and yet you do. You have all the accolades that you need, and you're not pursuing those, and yet you're tireless. I mean, I'm sure you're not tireless, but you're willing to work through, periods of exhaustion, but in order to continue to serve. And I'm wondering about the point in your life where that became so clear to you. Like as young people, oftentimes we don't see it right away. And maybe you did, but I'm curious if you can think about, either a moment or where it became so clear to you that it's not about you, it's about the people that you're serving.
well, I tell you, I was really blessed with two amazing parents. My father retired as an admiral in the Navy, and I had hoped to follow in his thing, but I had flat feet, and they kept on kicking me out. I don't know. I thought I would be tired all the time or something. Uh, but I won the president of the seventh grade in New Rochelle, and I came home and I'm all pumped up. And my dad said, "Well, Ken, I think this is the beginning of your leadership training. Now that you're president, don't ever use your position." He said, "Great leaders are great because people respect and trust them, not because they have power." And then my mother, who is an amazing person, she said to me, "Ken, don't you act like you're better than anybody else, but don't you let anybody act like they're better than you. God didn't make any junk. There's a pearl of goodness in every human being. Dig for it." And those have been the two guiding philosophies as I grew up and had a lot of opportunities, in New Rochelle to be, president of the school and co-captain the basketball team and all that. And they would say, now, don't get a big head on you. And so it was really wonderful. A lot of people don't have that kind of guidance when they're young, and they're trying to find out. I found, the people who are really problem in organizations who are self-serving are scared little kids inside. If
Exactly.
you ever read Thomas Harris books years ago about I'm okay, you're okay, he said the worst life position was I'm okay, you're not. And all the research showed that people who acted like I'm okay, you're not were really covering up not okay feelings about themselves. And so we think that effective leadership is a transformational journey. And we always start with the self and helping people find out who they are, feel comfortable in their own skin, develop their own mission statement, set of values, and what their leadership point of view is. And if we can get them comfortable with who they are, then they are. I think it was C.S. Lewis who first said that people with humility don't think less of themselves. They just think about themselves less. And I think that's kind of the journey.
How do you help people in that moment? Because it's a really hard place to be when they then they lack the confidence and the sort of underlying insecurity
Yeah.
that shows up as arrogance, right? To anyone who's
Yes.
arrogant, it's born of an insecurity.
For sure.
And you can't fix it by telling them, "Oh, you guys are great," because then they
Yeah.
just think more about themselves. But how do
Yes.
you, and you can't break them down because
Yeah.
then they stand more strongly in their necessity to be great. How do you help them in that moment?
Well, my experience is that, you get self-serving leaders and people get upset with them and they charge in their office and give them feedback and they throw them out of the office.
Right.
And what you have to understand is that if you're trying to influence somebody up the hierarchy, they have position power and all you potentially have is personal power. And if you don't have a relationship with them first, before you start talking about you know, how you can help them look at some of their own behavior. So I remember I was teaching in a business school one time, and the dean who came wrote a lot about participative management and all, but he was all my way or the highway and all, and everybody was all upset, and they were getting kicked out of his office. So I said to myself, I got to develop a relationship with him. So I met him in the hallway, and I said, George, you've done a lot of great writing, and I'm just getting going. I'm working on an article I'd like to get published in a journal. Would you be willing to read it and give me some feedback on it? He said, oh, absolutely. And I went to his office. He had flip charts and all. And so I had 2 or 3 sessions with him on getting his advice and writing. And during the third session, he said something that was so key. He said, Ken, what do you think we can do with all the jerks we got in this school? And the key word was, what can we do?
Right.
Because now I was on his team
Right.
and I could talk about things that we all could do and also give him some feedback. And he would listen because good human relations is like money in the bank. And if you don't have any deposits in the bank, you can't draw because I don't care how good you are at giving feedback. It takes something from your relationship. But if you got nothing in the bank, you better have a mask and a gun. Uh,
Right.
you know,
If you have nothing in the bank, you better have a mask and a gun. Right,
yeah,
right. And then you end up in that dynamic where, threats and power lording over people ends up in failure.
that's right, for
Right.
sure. You got to first build that personal relationship.
What did you say to him when he said, "What are we going to do with all these jerks around us?"
I said, that's something let's really talk about because I know that there's some concerns you have, and I think there's concerns they have. And we really got into some great dialogues.
And he
But he
trusted you
knew,
enough at that point for him to be able to
yes,
hear the point where you
yes,
could say they have some real issues on their side too.
sure, that's right. Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
The underlying challenge of servant leadership is a very, very simple one in some ways, which is, am I willing to put my own personal interest below the interest of others? And is that a fundamentally human thing to do? And how do we actually do that? Meaning, if you cut through all of the great wisdom and advice, we're asking people to do something very simple but incredibly hard, which is what you're saying, which is put the needs of others ahead of our own, especially when we're leaders and we have positional power, which which we could leverage to our own advantage. So I'm curious, is there a deep human instinct against this? Is there a deep human instinct towards it? How do we help people
Well,
get there?
it's a journey because a baby doesn't come into the world as a servant leader. They yell like hell for whatever they
For whatever
want,
they
And
want,
so
right?
it really is a journey in life. And I think some people get to the point at different points in their career when they really realize, they can watch where they've done things and it's a failure. I love John Maxwell in the forward said he always gets a kick out of people when they say it's lonely at the top. And he said, if it's lonely at the top, it's because you got no followers. What I recommend you do is get out of your office and go down and spend time with them and
Right.
bring them to the top.
Right.
And but I think it is a journey and a learning experience that people have, and looking for models of that. I mean, people say, well, who does what you say in terms of servant leaders? Only the leaders of every industry. If you look at Herb Keller and Colleen Barrett and all from Southwest Airlines, you look at Walt Disney with Disney and the Wegman family in the grocery business and the Nordstroms and in retail, and Starbucks with their great leader, and so there's some good models out there. I'm thinking of working on a book now entitled "Duh." Why isn't common sense common practice? That's really sometimes the question that I have.
I want to write that with you. If you're looking for a
Yeah.
co-author, I'm in it with you because
Oh,
because I actually think and uh, not making it too simple, but I think that's the hard stuff. I think the
yeah.
hard stuff is to say, I know I should do this. I know I should do this. And yet it's physically hard for me to do it because of the
Yeah.
risks. Because like there's a
Yeah.
lot of applehood and mother pie, and yet the risks of following through on the advice feel so powerful. Like I might, if I
Yeah.
risk, I might disappear if I
Yeah.
subjugate my own interest to the interest of others. So I think it's a really profound question as to why common
Yeah.
sense isn't common practice. And
Well, it's really interesting. If you look at the organizations that Jim Collins identified in Good to Great,
mhm,
nobody knew the CEOs of any of those companies. I mean, never heard of them. They weren't the Jack Welches or the
right,
Iacocas and all. And yet their companies were outperforming everybody at every level. And, that's, I think, but people, that's why my legacy I want to leave is this. We have such a need for a different leadership role model. We've seen what self-serving leaders have done in a negative sense in every sector of society around the world. And yet we see what happens when a servant leader comes in. I mean, look at Rwanda. I don't know if you know much about that. Rick Warren's over there a lot and all, but I mean, they were killing everybody, each other, and everything. And now they got this leader, and it's just unbelievable the
hmm,
change that's happened over there. Even you see some changes in the last number of years in Colombia with a different
right,
leader. And so we just need to rise up people that are there to serve rather than be served. And it. It's an interesting journey, but if we can find people like that, what a difference. My mother used to say to me, told you it was a great philosophy. She said, don't ever do anything good for somebody else with the idea you're going to get something back. But she said, you'll be surprised how much comes back
right.
when you reach out to other people. But don't do it to get something back. Do it because it's the right thing to do. But you'll be amazed at what will come back your way.
Yeah. I
Uh,
love Jim Kouz's and Barry Posner's chapter about finding your voice. And I love their
yes,
question, right? Can you learn about your soul, about your spirit?
yes,
And that's a
yes,
key to your own leadership. And
yes,
maybe that's an answer to the question that we're talking about and how to manage the amount of great wisdom in the book, which is understand yourself really well, your soul, your voice, and then
yes,
look to see how you can amplify that with the wisdom of the book. Am I thinking about this correctly? And I'd love your thoughts about
yes.
yourself because I know your soul and spirit and your spirit life and spiritual life is really important to you. And I
Yeah.
wonder how that interplays.
Well, one of the things that we have found, I have a Lead Like Jesus ministry that's all over the world, and we're not trying to convert people per se or anything, but uh, it's really clear if you look in the Bible how many times, you know, it says guard your heart, and do, and it's an inside out job really,
Right.
which we mentioned earlier, and the heart is that I'm here to serve, not to be served, and God didn't make any junk. It's really interesting. There's a wonderful pastor here in San Diego, Miles McPherson, who wrote an amazing book that just came out called The Third Option, and he's talking about overcoming racism and sexism and all. And the first two options are, look who I am. I'm right. You're wrong. You're this and that and all. And the third option, he said, is that everybody was made in God's image. And therefore, I don't care what your race is, your religion, or what have you. My role, like my mother said, there's a pearl of goodness in everybody, is to find that God-given goodness that's in there and to recognize that we're all children of God. And I think that's just something that we need to get, because the world is in such a win-lose attitude towards so many things rather than a win-win. And, how can I find out more about you and then you can find out about me, and we'll really find out that we're both, children of the good Lord, And I think it's a powerful, powerful book.
I'm curious about whether you think, clearly God has played a very, very important role in your life and your leadership and the way you think about leadership. I'm curious if you think God is a necessary component to being a really powerful servant leader, or holding something that is beyond you so that there's clarity that you are not the all-powerful, whether
Yes.
that's an essential element, and you hear about it in AA, it's an essential element. I'd love your thoughts on whether you think it's an essential element in leadership.
Oh, I think it really is. And whether you call it God or whether you call it a, greater being or what have you, that, we're part of this amazing universe and we're not the center of it. And I think it really is a real important realization when you realize, it's not all about me, for sure, And so we start our work in our leadership in our secular company as well as the Lead Like Jesus with the heart, and you'll get a kick out of it. We've developed a 12-step Egos Anonymous program, and because the thing that keeps people, I'll say to audience, how many of you would like to be known as self-serving leaders, and how many people would like to know as servant? Well, everybody's got their hand up. Well, why isn't everybody? And so we need to get to that. And the thing that keeps us from that is the human ego. And there's two ways ego, edging God out or everything good outside, shows up. As one is false pride. When you have a more than philosophy, I'm brighter than, that's the I'm okay, you're not, that we
Right.
talked about earlier. The other one that's really interesting is that people wouldn't think initially it's an ego problem. It's fear or self-doubt. How's that an ego problem? What are you focused on? It's a less than philosophy. And there's a lot of people who are have high control needs, not because they think they're brighter than other people, but they're scared little kids inside, already.
Right.
And they don't want to reveal their own weakness. It's Gary Ridge, who's a wonderful character president of WD-40, said the biggest learning he got when he became a CEO was to realize that he could say to his people, I don't know. And rather than them thinking less of him, they thought more of him,
Right.
because that means that he's inviting them to the party.
Right.
And, so I think that's a wonderful realization, I think.
And we talked a little bit about how to approach the ego-driven person, and that's to develop that kind of trust. I'm
Yeah.
curious about your insights in approaching the fearful person, the person who might be scrambling to get as much as they can because they fear it will all go away, and that
Yes.
they need that. How do you help them overcome that?
Well, I think that's where you can kind of talk to them about number one, God loves them
Hmm.
because we're all children of God, and that you need to become comfortable in your skin. And let's talk about what are your strengths. What do you think are things that you're good at? And a lot of times they've buried those. And you say, because I know you got some strengths and all, and so how do we kind of build on that? And how do we help you gather around you people who maybe take some of your weaknesses from you and can build on what your strengths are? And just, I think it's more there's where you're kind of loving on them
Hmm.
a little bit, where the people with false pride and the big egos, which are come in, it's kind of hard to love on them initially. You got to develop a personal relationship with them.
Right.
You know, yeah,
You mentioned Gary Ridge. I actually specifically wrote down, and I've actually written it down and put it on from this book, and put it. I've taped it onto my computer. His rank ordering of values. Right. I've often
yes,
said, and I know you've said
yeah,
that your true values are which values win out when two are in conflict, right?
that's right.
That it's
Yeah,
very, everybody has great values, but what choice do you make when two are in conflict? And he said, do the right thing,
yes,
create positive, lasting memories in all our relationships.
yeah,
Three is make it better than it is today. Four,
yeah,
succeeding as a tribe while excelling as individuals. Five is owning and passionately acting on it. And his sixth was sustaining the WD-40 economy. I wrote as my sixth, flourish financially. But it's
yeah,
but it's this idea, and I keep it there. And when I have decisions that I make, literally, I just look at my screen and I go, all right, start with number one. Do the
yeah.
right
Oh,
thing. What's the
good.
right thing here? And almost
Yeah,
always you could stop there because, the
good.
right thing pretty much covers the other five.
Yeah,
The other five. But it's, but I really loved that chapter and I loved Gary's perspective.
yeah, yeah. Have you interviewed Gary? He's a wonderful
I
person
know
too.
him. I know him well, and yet and actually he blurbed my last book along with you, but I haven't. I haven't had him on the podcast, and I really should because I
Yeah.
think he's delightful. So that's on my list now. I'll have him on
Yes.
the podcast.
He and I do a lot of sessions together because it really works well with him being a practicing manager and me being a theorist, and
Right.
we can give a really good 1-2 punch. And
And you wrote
and
a
you
book
know, I,
together.
I I use in the book the example of Walt Disney, how he intuitively got it. He had four values. Number one value was safety, because if they're in the happiness business and somebody gets carried out of their park on a stretcher, they wouldn't have the same smile on their face leaving
Right.
as they went in. But the second was service, which is how do we take care of people. And the third was the show, which is if you're on stage, you're in your role, whether it's Mickey Mouse or a ticket taker. And then the fourth one was efficiency, running a profitable, well-run organization. The reason he put it fourth is he didn't want anybody to think that they would do anything to save money to put people in danger,
Right.
and they weren't going to do a major downsizing,
Right.
in the park, so people couldn't find anybody to serve. I mean, I've been amazed at some stores you go into now, and you almost have a heart attack and lie on the floor before anybody will come and, say they'll help you. There's nobody
Right.
there. They've cut the bone out of the thing, which is really so crazy.
Right. I'm curious. I heard Jodie Foster interviewed once when she directed her first movie that she directed that she also acted in, and she said, one of the disappointments is she wasn't surprised, meaning she directed and she acted, and so she didn't do anything that surprised her. Whereas when she was a director and someone else was acting in it, because she had directed before, she just hadn't directed and acted in the same movie. The actor would do something that surprised her, and she would say, "Oh, that's really great," but she didn't do anything that surprised herself, and so that was one of
Huh.
the disappointing things. And you've written so many books, but I'm also sort of curious. here you're the director of this book. There's lots of authors who've written really great chapters, and I'm curious what surprised you about it. Did you, did people come up with things that you thought, huh, what an interesting and unusual take that I hadn't thought of?
Well, first of all, the big surprising thing is that they would all agree to do that, which I think was really something. And but I was continually surprised by some of the just interesting common examples of that you can serve in all parts of your life. Like I love John Gordon's article, where he talks about going to see his mother, and he went out for a walk with her, and she really seemed tired, and she was always in great shape, and so he said, "Mom, I think we should go back." She said, "No, I want to go to the store because I want to get something to make you a sandwich for your trip back home." And you get back home, and the first thing she does is go into the kitchen and make him a sandwich, and which he's enjoying on the way back to where he lived a couple of states away. And that was the last time he ever saw his mother,
Wow.
because he knew that she had, some symptoms of cancer, but didn't know how serious it
Right.
was. And so here she is, potentially dying and thinking about making a sandwich for her son. I mean, I thought that was a pretty, powerful thing. And the kind of choices you make in life, about Greg Rochelle talks about racing home, and being late for dinner, and he sees out in the country road this woman standing there and says, I mean, what's she doing out here? I mean, is she in trouble and all? But he thought, no, I need to get home, because I'm late for dinner. And he went by her, and that bugged him off because, it just didn't show compassion,
Right.
and so there was a lot of people, telling stories on themselves and things like that, which I thought was really interesting stuff. So it was just a blessing, and to see the stories of turnarounds, to see what Cheryl Batchelor did with Popeyes, and then Gary with WD-40, and
Yeah.
it was a joy. And so I've asked them all to join me, and let's start a whole new movement, around servant leadership,
Right.
and I wrote a paper before the Obama election against the fellow from Utah, called "The Leadership Vision for America," and I tried to get it in Washington, and nobody seemed to be too interested. But all of a sudden, I'm starting to get some interest, and people say we maybe need this, because the first thing I talk about is what I mentioned earlier. We don't have a vision for the country
Right.
anymore,
Right.
and but it really is true that if you look at what's happening in organizations, the great ones, their number one customer is their people.
Right.
And if they take care of their people, empower their people, love on their people, they take care of the customers, the people
Right.
that use their products and services, and that takes care of the, and one of the things I have in that paper is that I don't know why the citizens in this country are not looked at as business partners of the government. I mean, we're in the dark all the time. We don't know
Right.
what's going on, and
Well, it's the
and
element
like
of like, are you serving the community, or is the community there to serve you?
yeah, that's
And
right. Yeah.
that's the big difference.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And I have a good buddy who's a president of a big company in Australia, and when they had an unemployment problem, the head of commerce called him and said, "Would you willing to go around with me to all the major towns and cities in the country, and let's tell them about the unemployment thing and see if we can encourage them. If they had some businesses they were going to start, how can we get them going now?" And they came back with, hundreds of thousands of new jobs because they took the problem to the people.
Right.
A gal that works for us in our house, she said to me one day, "I understand we owe a lot of money to China." She said, "I don't think that's right, but if we knew how much, and we asked all the citizens to put a little money in every week to pay back that," she said, "I'd be willing to pay $5 a week or something like that. And I thought other people would pay more, if we ever knew what the deal was.
Right, right.
And so it's really is interesting. But gets to Maxwell. If you feel lonely at the top, which I think some people are feeling in Washington, that's because they don't have any followers.
Right.
You know.
Right. And followers who are engaged participants in the leadership journey along with them.
That's right. Yeah, and it really is. That's one of those big duh factors for me.
Right.
I mean, and like my father, as an admiral in the Navy, he said it's a myth that in the military it's my way or the highway. He said, sure, in battle somebody's got to call some of the shots and all, but he said if you acted like a big deal with your men all the time, he said they'd shoot you before the enemy.
Right.
Yeah, and he said I was nothing without my chiefs.
Right.
I mean, they had all the information. And
Ken, thank you so much. The book is Servant Leadership in Action: How You Can Achieve Great Relationships and Results. And Ken, it is always I always leave with more wisdom than I entered into when I'm in a conversation with you. So thank you so much for being on the Bregman Leadership Podcast.
Well, thank you. And people pick this up because it's really interesting. I asked, John Maxwell, who we should get to endorse the book. He said they're all in the book.
Right.
So the first 3 pages of the book list all the contributors, the Brene Browns and all the ones that you hear about, Marshall Goldsmith and Francis Hesselbaum,
they dole out pearls of wisdom. Like, they are very practical pearls of wisdom. And what I liked about it also, Ken, is that it's easy to read because each chapter, while it interconnects, stands on its own. And it's kind of how I like to do my books too. But I find it becomes very easy to read. In small bits.
And one of the reasons Renee is a co-author, she's one of my editors, and we told the people your article can be no longer than 6 or 7 pages. So we were eliminating stuff because one of the problems is reading books. The articles are too long. Right. So we want this to be a bathroom book. You can easily read a story a day.
It's great. I love it. Well, thank you so much for the book, and thank you so much for continuing to share on the podcast.
Oh, good. Great to be with you.